In 2018, economist Raj Chetty and his team published a study that used tax data from millions of Americans to answer a simple question: what is the probability that a child born in the bottom 20% will reach the top 20%? The answer: 7.5%. Less than 1 in 13. But that was only the national average. When Chetty broke down the data by zip code, the differences were enormous. In some neighborhoods, the probability was 12 or 13%. In others, 3. A child born in a neighborhood in San Jose, California, had 4 times the chance of climbing economically than one born 60 miles away, in Fresno. Same country. Same laws. Same economy. Radically different outcomes. Why? In the previous episode we saw how wealth is distributed and how inequality has grown. But inequality at a given moment tells only half the story. The other half is mobility. Can people move between economic positions over the course of a lifetime or from one generation to the next? A society can be unequal but mobile, large income differences, but with elevators that work. Or it can be equal but immobile, little difference between positions, but nobody moves. The ideal, of course, would be a society with low inequality and high mobility. The worst, high inequality and no mobility. And the data suggest that the worst is exactly what is happening in many countries. Social mobility is measured in 2 main ways. Intergenerational mobility measures how much your economic position changes over your own lifetime. A waiter who opens his own restaurant and prospers experiences upward mobility. An engineer who loses his job at 50 and never finds a comparable one experiences downward mobility. Intergenerational mobility measures the relationship between your economic position and your parents. If the son of a factory worker can become a doctor and the daughter of a banker can end up in precarity, intergenerational mobility is high. If the children of the rich are rich and the children of the poor are poor, mobility is low. The most commonly used technical indicator is the intergenerational earnings elasticity. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It measures how much parents' incomes predict children's incomes. If the value is 0, what parents earn says nothing about what children will earn. Perfect mobility. If the value is 1, children earn exactly what their parents earned. 0 mobility. In the Nordic countries, the elasticity is around 0.2. In the United States, 0.5. In the United Kingdom, 0.4. This means that if you are American, your parents' income predicts half of yours. If you are Danish, only a fifth. In 2012, economist Alan Kruger presented a graph that became famous under the name the Great Gatsby Curve. The graph showed a surprisingly clear relationship: more unequal countries have less social mobility. And more equal ones have more. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland are in the upper left corner: low inequality, high mobility. The United States and the United Kingdom are in the lower right corner: high inequality, low mobility. Latin America is even further into that corner. Correlation does not prove causation. But the pattern is so consistent that it suggests a deep connection. In very unequal societies, the distances between rungs are greater. Climbing requires more effort, more resources, more luck. Those at the top can invest more in their children's advantages: better education, better connections, better neighborhoods. Those at the bottom start with disadvantages that accumulate. There is an uncomfortable paradox here. The United States, the country that most celebrates meritocracy and upward mobility, has less intergenerational mobility than most European countries. The American dream, measured with data, works better in Scandinavia than in America. What factors determine social mobility? Research by Chetty and others has identified several. Education is the most obvious. Access to quality education from early childhood is the strongest predictor of upward mobility. Children who attend good preschool programs have better academic results, better jobs, and better incomes as adults. The effect is especially strong for children from poor families. Residential segregation is the second factor. Poor neighborhoods concentrate disadvantages: worse schools, less employment, more crime, fewer role models of success. Rich neighborhoods concentrate advantages. Chetty showed that moving a family from a poor neighborhood to a less poor one, even if the family's income did not change, significantly improved children's long-term outcomes. Family structure matters. Children from stable families tend to have better economic outcomes. But this observation must be qualified: family stability is strongly correlated with income. Families with more resources can afford more stability. Blaming family structure without acknowledging the underlying economic causes confuses symptom with cause. Social networks, in the sociological sense, not the digital one, are another documented factor. Who you know matters as much as what you know. Children of connected families have access to information, opportunities, and recommendations that children of isolated families do not. Network inequality reproduces economic inequality. The Indian economist and philosopher Amartya Sen proposed a different way of thinking about mobility. Instead of measuring only income, Sen suggested measuring capabilities, the real freedoms a person has to live the life they value. A person can have income but not capabilities if, for example, they live in a country where they cannot participate politically, or where discrimination prevents them from accessing jobs they are qualified for, or where a chronic illness without treatment limits everything they can do. The capabilities approach broadens the concept of mobility beyond the purely economic. It is not just about earning more than your parents. It is about being able to choose what to study, where to live, what to dedicate your life to. And those options depend on institutions, healthcare, education, and rights as much as on income. Martha Nussbaum developed Sen's idea into a list of 10 central capabilities that every person should be able to exercise: life, health, bodily integrity, senses and imagination, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, relations with other species, play, and control over one's environment. It is a way of measuring well-being that goes far beyond GDP and income. There is a form of social mobility that national debates usually ignore: migration. When a person moves from a poor country to a rich one, they experience a leap in income that no domestic policy could match. Studies show that workers who migrate from low-income to high-income countries multiply their earnings by 3, by 5, even by 10, doing exactly the same work. A bricklayer in Honduras earns a fraction of what a bricklayer in the United States earns. The difference is not in their skill or effort. It is in the institutional and economic environment where they work. From the perspective of global social mobility, migration restrictions are the greatest barrier to economic advancement that exists. Michael Clemens, an economist at the Center for Global Development, estimates that eliminating barriers to migration would double global GDP. It is probably the largest and most ignored number in all of economics. Migration has real costs and tensions: pressure on public services, wage competition in the least skilled segments, challenges of cultural integration. These problems are legitimate. But the debate about migration rarely takes into account the magnitude of the benefit it represents for migrants and for the global economy. Social mobility was not always as low as it is today. The post-war period, between 1945 and 1975, was a golden age of mobility in most developed countries. Children of factory workers reached university for the first time in history. Middle classes expanded massively. Wages grew every year. Buying a house, a car, and paying for children's education was possible on a single income. What made it possible? The combination of rapid economic growth, high progressive taxes, strong unions, massive public investment in education and housing, and an expansion of industrial employment that absorbed millions of workers without formal qualifications. Each of those factors has weakened. Growth has slowed. Taxes have been cut. Unions have lost members and power. Industrial employment has been offshored. And housing has become so expensive it is the greatest barrier to advancement. The question is whether that mobility was the historical norm or the exception. Piketty would say it was the exception, the result of 2 world wars and unrepeatable growth. If he is right, the current stagnation of mobility is not a deviation. It is the return to historical normality. Social mobility is not a number. It is the hope or hopelessness of millions of families. A father who works 12 hours a day hoping his children will live better. A mother who saves for years so her daughter can go to university. A young person who studies with discipline believing that effort is rewarded. If mobility exists, those bets make sense. If it does not exist, they are illusions. Societies that maintain the promise of mobility are more stable, more cohesive, and more dynamic. Those that lose it become polarized. The frustration of those who strive and do not advance feeds distrust in institutions, resentment toward elites, and the search for simple answers to complex problems. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, social mobility is measured by the correlation between parents' and children's incomes. The Nordic countries have the highest mobility in the developed world. The United States, despite its meritocratic narrative, has low and declining mobility. The Great Gatsby Curve shows that more inequality tends to produce less mobility. Second, the factors that determine mobility are education, neighborhood, social networks, and institutions. Chetty's research shows that zip code is a stronger predictor of economic future than talent or individual effort. Migration is the most powerful and most restricted form of mobility in the world. Third, the post-war golden age of mobility was possibly a historical exception, not the norm. The weakening of unions, the reduction of progressive taxes, industrial offshoring, and the rising cost of housing have reduced opportunities for advancement in most developed countries. We have seen what governments can do with the economy, monetary policy, fiscal policy, regulation, the safety net, institutional design. When it works, it transforms nations. But what happens when it does not work? Next time, when the state gets it wrong.